princess turned around to try to figure out where the voice was coming from, and she caught sight of a frog which had stuck its big old ugly head out of the water. "Oh, it's you, you old splish splasher," she said. "I'm crying because my golden ball has fallen into the spring." "Be quiet and just stop that snivelling," said the frog. "I think I can help you, but what will you give me if I fetch your little plaything?" "Whatever you want, dear frog," she said. "My dresses, my pearls, and my jewels, even the golden crown I'm wearing." The frog said, "I haven't the least interest in your dresses, your pearls and jewels, or your golden crown, but if you promise to love me and let me be your companion and playmate, let me sit beside you at the table and eat from your little golden plate. Let me drink from your little cup and let me sleep in your little bed. If you promise me all that, I will dive right down into the spring and bring back your golden ball." "Oh, thank you," she said. "I'll give you anything you want as long as you get that ball back for me." But all the while she was thinking, what nonsense that stupid frog is talking. He's down there in the water, croaking away with all the other frogs. How could anyone want to have him as a companion? Once the frog had gotten her word, he put his head back in the water and dove down into the spring. After a while, he came paddling back with the ball in his mouth, and he tossed it on the grass. When the princess saw her beautiful plaything in front of her, she was overjoyed. She picked it up and ran off with it. "Wait for me," the frog cried out. "Take me with you. I can't run the way you can." He croaked as loudly as he could, but it did him no good at all. The princess had lost interest in him, hurried home as fast as her legs would carry her, and quickly forgot about the poor frog, who had to crawl back down into the spring. The next day, the princess sat down to dinner with the king and with some courtiers, and was eating dinner from her little golden plate, when something came crawling up the marble staircase, splish, splash, splish, splash. When it reached the top of the stairs, it knocked at the door and called out, "Princess, youngest princess, let me in." The princess ran to the door to see who was there. When she opened it, she saw the frog standing in front of her. Terrified, she slammed the door as hard as she could and returned to the table. The king could see that her heart was pounding like mad, and he said, "My child, what are you afraid of? Is there some kind of giant at the door coming after you?" "Oh no," she replied, "it wasn't a giant, it was just a disgusting frog." "What in the world does a frog want with you?" "Oh, father dear, yesterday when I was playing by the spring, my little golden ball fell into the water, and because I was crying so hard, the frog got it for me, and because he insisted, I promised that he could become my companion. I'd never thought that he would be able to leave the water. Now he's outside and he's demanding to come in to see me." Just then there was but she was not happy about it. The frog had enjoyed his meal, but every bite she had stuck in her throat. Finally he said, "I've had enough to eat and I'm really tired. Take me up to your room and turn down the silken covers on your little bed." The princess began to weep, for she was terrified of the clammy frog. She didn't dare touch him, and now he was going to sleep in her beautiful clean bed. The king grew angry and said, "You shouldn't scorn someone who helped you when you were in trouble." The princess picked up the frog with 2 fingers, carried him up to her room and put him in a corner. While she was lying in bed, he came crawling over and said, "I'm tired and want to sleep as much as you do. Lift me up into your bed or I'll tell your father." The princess became really annoyed, picked up the frog and threw him with all her might against the wall. "Now you'll get your rest, you disgusting frog." When the frog fell to the ground, he was no longer a frog, but a prince with beautiful bright eyes. At her father's bidding, he became her dear companion and husband. He told her that a wicked witch had cast a spell on him, and that only a princess could release him. The next day, they planned to set out together for his kingdom. The 2 fell asleep, and in the morning, after the sun had woken them, a coach drove up. It was drawn by 8 white horses in golden harnesses, with white ostrich feathers on their heads. At the back of the coach stood faithful Heinrich, the servant of the young king. Faithful Heinrich had been so saddened by the transformation of his master into a frog that 3 hoops had been placed around his chest to keep his heart from bursting with pain and sorrow. Now the coach had arrived to take the young king back to his kingdom, and faithful Heinrich lifted the 2 of them into the carriage and took his place in the rear. He was elated by his master's transformation. When they had covered a good distance, the prince heard a cracking noise behind him, as if something had broken. He turned around and cried out, "Heinrich, the coach is in danger." "No, my lord, it's not the coach, but a hoop from round my heart, which was in deep pain while you were down in a spring, living as a frog." 2 more times the prince heard the cracking noise, and he was sure that the coach was falling apart, but it was only the sound of the hoops breaking from around faithful Heinrich's chest, for his master had been set free and was happy at last. Okay, so let's see what else we have. Well, we've already done Rapunzel. We've done Cinderella. What's this one? The Fisherman and his wife. Let's try this one. Okay, this is the Fisherman and his wife. Once upon a time, a fisherman lived with his wife in a pigsty, not far from the sea. Every single day, the fisherman went off to fish, and he fished and he fished. One day, he dropped his line into the water, stirred out at the surface, and he sat and he sat. The line sank down to the bottom, way deep down, and when the fisherman pulled it back up, there was a huge flounder at the end of it. The flounder said to him, "Listen to what I have to say, fisherman. I'm pleading with you. fisherman replied. What in the world would I wish for? That's not hard to figure out, the wife said. Living in a pigsty is pretty dreadful. The stench is really disgusting. You could have asked for a little cottage. Go back and talk to him. If you tell him we would like to have a little cottage, he's sure to give us one. How can I go back there again? Asked the fisherman. Didn't you catch him and then let him swim away? He's sure to help us. Go back there right now, the wife said to him. The fisherman didn't really want to go back, but he also didn't want to irritate his wife, and so he made his way back to the shore. When he got there, the sea was dark green with shades of yellow and not nearly as calm as before. He stood there and said, Flounder, flounder in the sea, rise on up, swim here to me. My wife, whose name is Alsbill, has sent me here against my will. The flounder swam up to him and asked, Well, what does she want? My wife tells me that since I managed to catch you, I should also have made a wish. She's tired of living in a pigsty, and she'd rather live in a little cottage. Just go on home, the flounder said. She's already living in it. The fisherman went home, and his wife was no longer stuck in the pigsty. Instead, she was sitting on a bench by the door of a little cottage. She took him by the hand and said, Come on in and take a look around. This is much better, isn't it? They went indoors and found a little hallway and a lovely little parlour and a bedroom with a bed for each of them, and a kitchen with a pantry and all the best furnishings and utensils, tin and brass, everything you could ever want. And behind the cottage there was a little farmyard with chickens and ducks, along with a garden full of vegetables and fruit. Just look, said the wife. Isn't this wonderful? Let's just hope it stays that way, and then we can live in peace. We'll see about that, said the wife, and they sat down to eat and went to bed. Everything was fine for a week or two. Then the woman said, Listen to me, husband. This cottage is getting just a bit too crowded, and the barnyard and garden are really too small. That flounder could have given us a bigger house. I'd rather be living in a big stone castle. Go talk to the flounder and tell him to give us a castle. Dear wife, said the husband, this cottage is really good enough for us. Why would we want to live in a castle? Nonsense, the wife replied. Just go talk to the flounder. He'll take care of it. No, wife, said the man. The flounder just gave us this cottage. I don't want to go back again. He might be offended. Get going now, said the wife. He can do it, and he won't mind at all. The man went with a heavy heart, and he wanted to turn back. He thought to himself, This is just not right, but he left anyway. When he arrived at the shore, he saw that the water was no longer green and yellow, but purple and dark blue, and grey and murky on top of that, but it was still calm. He stood there and said, Flounder, flounder in the sea, rise on up, swim here to me. My wife, whose name is Ilesbill, has sent me here against my will. Well, what does she want this time? Asked the flounder. The fisherman was very upset and said, Now she wants to live in a big stone castle. Just go home. She's already standing at the entrance, the flounder said. The fisherman left and thought that he would go back home, but when he got there, he found kings of this land. Go talk to the flounder and tell him that we want to be king. But my dear wife, said the man, why would we want to be king? I don't want to be king. Well, said the wife, maybe you don't want to be king, but I want to be king. Go talk to the flounder and tell him that I want to be king. But wife, said the fisherman, why would you want to be king? I can't tell him that. And why not? Asked the wife. Just get going. I have to be king. The fisherman was unhappy that his wife wanted to be king, but he went anyway. That's just not right. It's not right at all, he thought. He didn't want to go, but he went anyway. When he arrived at the shore, the sea was grey-black and the water was churning up from below and had a foul smell to it. He stopped ells high. On her head was a golden crown, 3 ells high, and studded with diamonds and emeralds. In one hand she was holding a sceptre, and in the other the imperial orb. Bodyguards were standing in a row on both sides, each shorter than the one before him, beginning with an enormous giant who was about 2 miles tall, to a tiny dwarf no bigger than my little finger. Princes and dukes were gathered in a crowd before her. The fisherman went and stood among them and said, "Well, wife, it looks like you're finally emperor." "Yes," she said, "I am the emperor." He stood and took a good look at her, and after staring for a while he said, "Wife, now that you're emperor, let's leave well enough alone." "Husband," she said, "why are you standing there? Now that I'm emperor, I want to become pope. Go talk to the flounder." "Oh, wife," the man said, "what will you be asking for next? You can't become pope. There's only one pope in all Christendom. The flounder can't make you pope." "Husband," said the wife, "that's hogwash. If he can make me emperor, he can also make me pope. Do as you're told. I'm the emperor, and you're just my husband, so you had better get going." The fisherman was filled with dread and felt faint, but he went back all the same, shivering and shaking. His knees went weak and his legs wobbled. A strong wind was blowing and the clouds were racing across the skies. By evening it had turned dark and gloomy. Leaves were blowing from the trees, and the waters seemed to be boiling as they roared down below and foamed up above. In the distance, the fisherman could see ships sending out distress signals as they were tossed and turned about the waves. There was still a patch of blue in the middle of the sky, but it was surrounded on all sides by red as in a terrible storm. Full of fear and despair, the fisherman stood there and said, "Flounder, flounder in the sea, rise on up, swim here to me. My wife, whose name is Iselbill, has sent me here against my will." "What does she want now?" asked the flounder. "Dear me," said the man, "she now wants to become pope." "Go home," said the flounder. "She already is." And so he returned home, and when he got there, he found a large church surrounded by palaces. He forced his way through the crowds. Inside, the whole place was lit up by thousands and thousands of candles, and his wife was clothed in pure gold, sitting on a throne even higher than before. She was wearing 3 immense crowns of gold, surrounded by papal splendour. She sat there with a line of candles on each side of her, the largest as thick and as tall as the biggest tower, down to the smallest kitchen candle, and all the emperors and kings were down on their knees before her, kissing her slipper. "Wife," the man said, taking a good look at her, "so now you are pope." "Yes," she replied, "I am the pope." He stood there looking at her, and he felt as if he were looking right into the bright light of the sun. After staring at her for a while, he said, "Well, wife, now that you are pope, maybe you can leave well enough alone." She stood there stiff as a board and neither stirred nor moved. "Wife," he said to her, "you had better be satisfied now that you are pope. There is really nothing beyond that." "We'll see about that," said the wife, and then they both went to bed. But she still wasn't satisfied. Her ambition would not allow her to go to sleep. She kept wondering what else there was. The fisherman slept well and soundly, for he had covered a lot of ground that day. As for the wife, she could not even get to sleep. All night long she tossed and turned in her bed, thinking about what else she could become. But she was at a loss. Then the sun began to rise, and when she saw the light of dawn, she sat straight up in bed and looked out of the window. She watched the sun rising and eyes and said,